right, welcome everybody. If you're watching this on the VOD later, we definitely missed you in the live call. Today's call is going to be about the Region Master format. This is a format that me and RJam both came up with when we were looking for a unique format to highlight in our invitational. And it kind of stemmed from the card lock format. Let me share my screen too. Here we go. Screen. Yeah, so it stemmed from the card lock format where every card can only be used in a deck once, but the regions can overlap. The key difference with Region Masters, all three of your decks have to share a region, which might initially make you think that that's going to be harder to build a deck, but it's just different in the way that you come about it, because there's many different decks and deck combinations that you can come up with that all share the same region. If you just look at the card pool, is probably the first place you look when trying to decide. You can't use the same champion twice, right? But there's some easy ways to approach this. You can't use any card twice, so you want to look for the strengths of each region. Is one way you can do it. You can just look at the strengths and find out what the best cards are. Like if you Make It Rain before it was recently nerfed. It's the type of card that you probably want in multiple Village Water decks. Whenever we were first looking at the format, it's like, well, how can you build Village Water outside of that? Well, that'd be hard to do. That's probably the toughest region that just in deck theory and deck building. That region was probably one of the tougher ones for me to try and come up with a lineup. But we will. The good thing about this format is it will highlight, I think, different takes on decks that are already popular, because the cards that overlap, you won't see as many stock lists, I don't think, which kind of makes it a little bit more exciting from a viewer's perspective. But from a brewer's perspective, I think the easiest way to approach deck building in this, I think the most obvious, if we're going to try and predict the metagame for a format that just hasn't existed yet, first time format, it's going to be Friday, the Invitational qualifier, and then the Invitational is going to have rounds involving it as well. So we want to look at what the most obvious, and I feel like the most obvious thing to do would be to make two allegiance decks, to just break people will probably just try and break the foundation of the format, where you're a master of the region, right? And you can do that very easily by playing two allegiance decks that dip into the region that you were trying to master. So if we want to look at more allegiance, so the first thing you would do is you'd look for allegiance decks, allegiance cards, like Bannerman, right? That's probably the first, most obvious one, at least to me. But if we look at all the allegiance cards, we say, well, what are the best allegiance cards? We'll start with that. Scavenger has been pretty much the worst. Outriders has been an outlier. Wraithcaller is probably one of the best. Bannerman as well. Kinko had its day. Grifter got nerfed, but is still here. You can still play Grifter. Basilisk Strider got nerfed as well after its buff. And then Mountain Scryer just isn't really in many decks right now. And I think there's a reason for that. So if we try and build off of those blocks where we start with just the Allegiance cards, and we want to make two decks with Allegiance going into that, we would probably start looking for a Wraithcaller deck and a Bannerman deck, right? That can splash into a single region. It's very possible that you could even use the Mountain Scryer and then have three Allegiance decks to make it even easier, that all splash into one region. Now, to do that, you'd have to find cards worth splashing for. So, Vanguard Bannerman, we've seen the Demacia Allegiance deck splash into every region pretty easily. You can jump into Shadow Isles with the Callista as a champion choice. You can do some top-end Harrowing or Ruination if you're going into Shadow Isles. But if we're looking to do Bannerman next to Wraithcaller, we're going to have to find something to do there. I think one of the more obvious is probably Mountain Scryer and Bannerman as your allegiances, right? Like, have you ever seen the Day and Night deck? That's a deck. You don't see it. It's not that popular now, but it's a very value-driven deck. That's Diana, Leona, Day and Night. That's where the name comes from. But you play Mountain Scryer, you can have this Allegiance, because you're really getting a lot of your win cons and everything else coming, and your value coming off your Celestial cards. Mountain Scryer is a big part of that, and it usually only splashes for the horror, Unspeakable Horror. So that's not that hard to imagine right there. And that deck is kind of fallen out of favor, I think, because it never really gained much traction, but I think the deck is really good. It did win a couple of our qualifiers earlier, maybe a patch or two ago, and it hasn't shown much results. And I think largely because of how over the top War Mothers, and then beyond that, Feel the Rush has been in the meta. See, those decks are just kind of like, okay, yeah, you outvalue the whole way, but I don't have much that you can gain value off of because I'm not playing many units. I'm just ramping. Here's my Trundle. Good luck dealing with that. And then I'm just going to overwhelm you with these 12 drops, invalidating all the value that you created, really, just by ending the game in a couple turns. So I think that's why that deck has kind of fallen out of favor. Also, we've seen recently the Twisted Fate Elise, Twisted Fate Gangplank, the Twisted Fate Go Hard deck has gotten more and more popular. There's a lot of streamers that are playing. I myself am playing it. There's going to be this week's ladder showcase video is going to be about it as well. That's the type of deck that plays similar to the Day and Night deck, and that is just trying to accrue value, and then close with like a big Celestial monster is kind of the big plan, or just overwhelm you with value, you see. And those decks are just, it's worst matchup, if you ask anybody who plays that TF deck, is the Freyord Shadow Isles ramp decks, because they largely invalidate the value you've had, can sweep you up with Ruination or Avalanche, even worse, Avalanche. At least Avalanche isn't killing everything in the Mountain Scryer deck. So yeah, I'm going off on a little tangent, but that's the type of deck that can splash into Shadow Isles, as well as if you want to play the Gangplank deck that also plays Shadow Isles, you can play it without Unspeakable Horror. I think it's better with just Vile Feast, honestly, if you're playing the Elise version especially. So you're not really touching on anything in that main deck to be able to play that, right? And then that deck doesn't even play, if we look at it, I'll go ahead and just pull up my version, the latest version that I've been playing at the bottom. Here we go. So if we're talking about this deck, I don't even play the Ruination. I got the Riptide Rex, right? Now this might change because of the patch notes today, which we'll go over later in the call as well. This used to be a Ruination, but it doesn't have to be any of those things, actually. It could be just about anything in this spot. It's just a closer. That's why there's one Gangplank. There's two Elises for the early game. One Gangplank. Gangplank and Rex both act as closers to close out the game. I'm trying Wave Rider right now. But the whole point of this deck is really just value. It's like TF barrels, getting value, drawing extra cards, getting value, and just having just so much value on your opponent that you overwhelm them with it. And as you can see, there's Unspeakable Horror here, but this could very easily be Vile Feast. So if you did like the Day and Night deck plus the Traveling Gambler, you see, you end up with I can't spell. This is terrible. Here we go. I'm the worst. There we go. Nope, did it wrong. Allegiance. It's kind of embarrassing. Anyway, if you go back to the whole Allegiance plan, then you end up in a good spot with at least the Targon version. So if you do Targon Allegiance and you want to play that as your main deck, that's easy. And then you can play another, since you're not playing the Harrowing or the Ruination, you could play a Bannerman deck with Harrowing and Ruination on top. So that just seems like an obvious lineup. You have two Allegiance decks, dipping in one color, and then you're playing your main deck that you really want to play. And so people will probably take whatever deck they're playing best on ladder, the deck that they're having the most fun with, and then grab two Allegiance decks. So that's the easiest baseline level, I think, when people try and approach deck building. Start with that. Just because it invalidates the restriction as much as possible, leaving the most room for building. If that's going to be the first place, how can you counteract that? Okay, well, if that's going to be the popular thing, there's not really a great. I mean, if you look at all the Allegiance cards, it's mostly value. And Yordle Grifter is going to be value. So is Bannerman will be some kind of value. It is kind of aggressive, but it is like mid-range value. Getting your units to survive, or your surviving units become bigger. Things like that. Send me a message here. Let's see. Yeah, so then you do Bannerman, because neither one of those decks play, and that is kind of an obscure deck that you don't really see in the meta, is Bannerman. But that's one thing about tournaments, and one good way to be successful in tournaments is whenever it comes to selecting your lineup, you might have a good peg on a meta, and you got two decks that are well in that meta, but finding a third deck could be hard, grabbing from the current meta pool of decks. So if we can do callbacks to like Bannerman, these cards are still here. Well, what would that look like in a modern day format? Well, people might not have thought about doing it right here on the ladder, but it presses you to do so in tournament deck selection. So I do like that about the Region Master format, because it'll stretch people more like that as well. So other Allegiance cards like Outriders, I have played this recently and does see some play. Yeti Pursuit. So if you wanted to splash into Demacia, but you grab Single Combat, which is one of the best cards in Demacia, so it might not be one to really do. Most Demacia decks are going to want Single Combat, so that shouldn't be your main region, I don't think, is the Demacia. So it's not super likely that Demacia is going to be anybody's main region. It's also genuinely kind of weak right now. You can do Kinku Wayfinder. That one can splash easily. We've seen it done with Omen Hawk and Braum, or Omen Hawk and Fury of the North. They obviously nerfed the Fury of the North, but Battle Rage, different things. You can do the Wayfinder into another region as well. The Wraith Callers usually get paired. You can pair them with, I don't know, Noxious to do Fearsome, as was mentioned earlier. Fearsome, yeah, imagine Wraithcaller could fit right in there. Just maybe splash just for like Darius and some Noxian Fervor. Yordle Grifter splashes in a Freyord, probably probably the easiest. You would think maybe Yordle Grifter with a Gangplank Sedge, something like that. Yordle Grifter doesn't really have many other spots. You don't see it. It's not very popular elsewhere. You could maybe do like a A-Soul, but that would be too wild if you did like A-Soul with whatever it was, 7-drop. It makes it all cheaper. Yeah, Smooth Soloist. So it doesn't really have a spot, I don't think, other than splashing in the Freyord. So that would be a restriction here on the Yordle Grifter, at least for competitive decks. Now, I've tried it also in the TF Gangplank deck, and then with the Go Hard, you can play just Go Hard and just Glimpse, and just be a mono Bilgewater deck. So if you were making this your splash region, Shadow Walls, then that's a possibility. Again, easy to splash into with Bannerman. You also could see Kinku Wayfinder splash into Demacia as well, or in the Shadow Wilds. The Wayfinder, I'm not sure what to do. Anyway, but this is probably the first line. People are going to cheat the restriction. Okay, so now that we see these are the different lineups that can produce, we want to go a little deeper. There's another way to maybe start building process. Another way you do is you can build around a fundamental deck that you really like, or that you're very experienced with, and then try and see what you can build off of what your number one deck is right now. Like there's different metas I've played in, like when everybody was playing Ash Sejuani, I was really liking the Casino deck because it was good against a lot of what was going on in that meta, and the Casino deck was really good. So I'd play on ladder, and if I tried to play experimental decks to practice, whenever I lost a match, I would play a game with Casino and get the win back. So everybody's got a deck like that where it's like, okay, I can grind this deck and at least come up with a above 50% win percentage. Let's go with that, right? And and they're comfortable with. So if we're going to build out of that, that's one way to go. So currently, like I said, my most common deck. The deck that I've been doing the best with on the ladder has been the, as I call it, the Traveling Gambler. I've been liking this deck a lot. Call it Traveling Gambler because you get Pack Your Bags over here, and it's got a Twisted Fate. So I call it, the people call it different things. They call it the Traveling Gambler. So go hard. You know, a lot of this Village Water stuff. There is Croaker in here. That's one thing to note, because if you play Croaker in here, it's going to be hard to play this with like a Tahm Kench Soraka style deck. Croaker is pretty important in this deck list, I would say. So it could be hard to stretch Village Water. And I said that earlier as being one of the harder regions to master, to play all of them. Because even if you shave some numbers on some things, I mean, it's a little difficult. Jagged Butcher. There are a decent number of 1-drops, though, so maybe now it's not as hard as I would think. But the first thing I will want to pair with this is my second favorite deck, which is, and it might be that, you know, Betty Croaker over here is just one of my favorite cards going on right now, because I like the Tahm Kench Soraka. So it's just not much you can really do to play both of them, since it is going to be card locked. The Croaker. Cutting the Croaker from either deck is going to be too hard to pull off, I think, for what else you can do. So it's very possible that we should, you know, to pick one of the two to be the deck that we bounce off of. And it's going to be hard to match the Targon if you came this way, so you would also have to match this, because some of the best cards in Targon are like Pale Cascade. You want it in just about every Targon deck you play, exceptions being maybe like a Trundle Asoul Ramp. But we don't know how that's going to look, because Trundle's getting a nerf. So, and it's not super popular right now either. So it's not super stellar. So we'd have to do Village Water. And again, this is going to be difficult to do. This lineup, just either one. I think either one of those are just going to be really hard to do. This is one of the bigger outliers. Like, you don't have to play the Codger if you play like a Swain TF. You don't have to play Croaker if you play a Swain TF. It doesn't play Boxtopus or Shakedown if you want to play a Swain TF. But once you pair this with Swain TF, you don't really have much room. And Swain TF took a hit with the Make It Rain as well. And I guess you don't have to play... I mean, you got to play Make It Rain in that deck. Even at 3 mana. It doesn't feel great. But what other cards want to go into Bilge Water? You could do something crazy and splash into it. You could do an Allegiance, splash into it. Maybe something crazy like a Hecarim, Mono Shadow Isle crazy deck, right? And then play Ephemerals, basically. Hecarim Ephemerals playing Monkey Idol, because Monkey Idol makes Ephemerals and extra bodies every turn. And then maybe just jump in on that with Gangplank. I don't know. See, there's some stretches we're gonna have to make and call back some crazy archetypes to be able to pair with this deck as well. So it's like, well, what are we gonna do? I think it's probably best to jump in on the Traveling Gambler if we're gonna work on that point, and then just maybe you can go through the Shadow Isle stuff, right? Because with the Unspeakable Horror, you kind of get a split on 2 decks. You don't have to play like War Mothers that wants to play more than 3 of that effect, and you can split the difference. So if you went like Cut the Horror, played Wild Feast, which I do think's better. Okay, so that makes a little room if we want to do Unspeakable Horror on the other side. Doom Beast, if you play Doom Beast in this deck, it cuts off some stuff like Endure, potentially. But one thing is the removal. If you wanted to play a deck that just played Vengeance, Harrowing, Ruination, something up top like that, it's easy to do with a deck like this, as long as you don't need access to the Glimpse. Again, the Elise can go to a Gangplank, so there's possible you can play Elise Spider's Fearsome in a different deck. Spider's Fearsome, because that deck's not going to need Vengeance. It doesn't need Crumble. May or may not need Doom Beast. Probably needs Doom Beast. Actually, let's see. You're in the... let's see. PK, you said you were playing a Fearsome deck?
Yeah, Doom Beast is a really good card. It's just a really good card. Play it when you can. It doesn't need to be in the fearsome deck.
Yeah, but it's
You can
good.
definitely run versions without it. The reach is nice. Feels bad to take it out, um, but
Right.
it's definitely doable.
Yeah, I mean, you could potentially take it out of this deck too, but it feels really good with the barrels, and also just giving you the life gain to find more time to get to the go hard. But you could swap it for Petty Officer if you needed to. Some people don't play it. Some people have talked about cutting it. There's a lot you can
Yeah,
do.
I'd probably take it out of the fearsome deck before I took it out of this deck.
Yeah, and so those would be the kind of things that you would have to figure out what your next deck's going to be. A great deck for this meta, though, I would say, for the meta and for just in general, the format and the meta would be a deep deck. And
Sure, I thought it'd be popular.
and a deep deck is going to be great because all of its cards that it plays from either region. I wouldn't be surprised if this was the most popular deck in the region master format because all of its cards and all of its in either region pretty much don't get played in other decks from the same region. Like this is a version that doesn't play Vile Feast. Okay, it's a very proactive deep list that I've been working on, and being this proactive without the Vile Feast, like it doesn't even need this vengeance. So, and you don't see any other Bilgewater deck play any of these sea monsters or slaughter docks or lure of the depths, or some might play Jawal hunters, but it's most prevalent in this deck than any other deck. Jettison, of course not. Dredgers, of course not. And if you go down on the Shadow Isle side, it's like, yeah, Stalking Shadows is there, but there's plenty of cards that do a similar thing. So if you pair it with a deck that plays Stalking Shadows, this deck doesn't need the Stalking Shadows. You can play a more control list. You can, split the difference. You can play, like, that's the thing about Deep, is it lives and dies off of how good its, peripheral cards play into the current meta, you see. So it's like, well, Stalking Shadows, this can be good. But then this, I mean, we've seen it already. You can play it with Faded Memories. We've seen Faded Memories on this stuff. We've seen it with the 3 drop, the miss call, to bring back these uh, summon effects like Jawal Hunters and Dead Bloom Wanderer and all that. So you can play any of those effects. I've played Glimpse in this deck as well as a way to kill your Toad at fast speed, and then also get you too closer to deep as well. A lot of things you can do actually. So it's like the perfect deck for Region Master if you wanted to play one of these two regions because it lightly touches in without disrupting much. So if I wanted to play this, I could do this and then just branch off from here in either direction, honestly. So if I wanted to do Shadow Isles as my other region, then pretty easy. I could just, or if I want to do Bilgewater, see we can do it. We can do it like this. You can put this one with the Kinch deck, right? Put this one with the Kinch deck because the Kinch deck's got nothing in that, and we'll go Bilgewater. What that leaves us is the Allegiance stuff. If we want it, it leaves us with Make It Rain as well. You could swing TF with this. This is a lineup that I cooked up actually with another Academy member on some private coaching. And this is where we landed. And deep was the first spot because it, like I said, it can reach into either region and just fine. So if we're gonna jump into that, it's like we like deep. Let's start with deep, and then we can mold off. Okay, great. I got to keep the Tom Kench Sirocco. What's cool about that lineup when you start crafting that lineup like that is you already have 2 decks that are gonna have decent or good matchups against the War Mothers decks, the Freyord ramp decks. Because I don't think those decks do that well against this. I mean, they're fine. They can go over the top of it for sure. But I think all in all, this is slightly favored. The Soraka Kench deck. It does come down to the play of the opponent. But like if they haven't played the matchup much, they're going to have difficulty. I think it came down to as much as like a Trundle attacking face, allowing my Broadback Protector to come down and heal 3 to be able to have something to heal to win with a Star Spring, which is just a pretty ridiculous card. But so if we're already shaping it up that way, if we go into this with this deck, so then we need to grab another Bilgewater deck. So that could be either like a Swain TF, you could do that, or maybe we could just do a Gangplank Sejuani. We could do a new deck like that. We just do a Gangplank Sejuani. Let's see if there's any overlap here on a Gangplank Sejuani. I'm pretty sure there isn't. Actually, I'm gonna go ahead and pull up a web browser and just grab a recent list. Yeah. Deck library here. Pull this up over here so y'all can see it. That could even be Misfortune Sejuani as well. Matter of preference, really. Turbo Sage GP. See the top players are talking about it 2 minutes ago. Taskmaster. So this is like excessive 1-drops. But if you notice, there's nothing in this deck that's in either one of the other decks. So that would be an easy jump right there. It's actually an Allegiance deck too, if you were considering using Freyord as your first one. So that's another good note as well. This, yeah, see, this looks fine. You got some value in the mid game. You got a Sejuani lockdown as well. And Riptide up top. Now, again, Riptide is getting nerfed, so that will make this deck worse for sure. So I don't know that invalidates it because the Rex is still good, I think, even with only 6 shots. Yeah, so those are 2 easy ways to build by grabbing decks that you can either cheat with, you can cheat the deck building rules by playing a couple allegiances. Not really cheating it, but it's a good way to broaden it for you to be able to fit room for a 3rd deck. Or you can use this, this deep deck, right, as, you know, the first spot. Now, if we did it with Bilgewater, now let's do it with Shadow Isles, and I'll show you how easy it is with Shadow Isles too. If you did with Shadow Isles, again, there's this Day and Night deck that, well, not this exact one because something somebody sent me, but you can do Day and Night and just jump in on Unspeakable Horror. But that's more to the tune of the first way to build, where you had this Allegiance deck. If we wanted to just play like a real middling Shadow Isles deck, we could play like Zombie Ash. If you want to get your Harrowings and your Ruinations in the mix, and then you would need something lower to the ground on the next one, which would be a Shadow Isles. You could do, say you just want to do Endure next to the Deep, because Endure is not a bad deck. Not super popular lately, but let's take a look here. If you're an Endure player, this would make some sense here. Let's see. Oh, that's not what we wanted. They who Endure. Okay, They Who Endure. We're gonna just look at Endure Pillar. What is this? Troll? No, Doom Beast Endure. This is the aggressive version. So if we look at the aggressive version of this deck, this is a pretty heavy Shadow Isle deck. But it doesn't play the Allegiance. But that's okay. There's Atrocity, Unspeakable Horror, Stalking Shadow, Shroud of Darkness. Shroud of Darkness, nice with the They Who Endure, giving it Spell Shield. Interesting. Yeah, so this is a deck. If you just took this deck and then run that one inside. Now I'm going to do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put SI Region Master with a single exclamation point. That way you can see at the top of the list. So then we have that. alongside the deep deck. And then what you have to find now is what's lacking. The better cards of Shadow Isles that aren't represented in the Endure deck. So that would be the Harrowings and the Ruinations. These are big spells. Maybe the Harrowings and the Ruinations. That's what we want to see. Maybe the Ladris, right? Potentially, yeah. If you're looking at the top, maybe Rekindler, some Vengeance. These cards are, because there is Vengeance in that deep list, but it doesn't need to be Vengeance. Do we still have access to, like, if you got to Vile Feast at least, right? Probably not Stalking Shadows because you want that in your Endure deck. So if you look at it that way, it becomes a little easier. And there are some tailors that you could change to this deck. Like you could play Sejuani instead of Elise, right? And then you could play like Sejuani Callista, and then maybe play the Neverglade Collector. Oh, you already got Neverglade Collector in here. All right, I'm tripping. I know some people have been cutting that in recent lists. Yeah, so you got a lot of drain in this deck. It's aggressive. That's fine. It's balanced out. You have Deep, which is also a proactive deck. So then you probably want something that can be proactive as well. And play Shadow Isles. So probably you can't really do Fearsome because Callista's already taken up. So you're going to want some kind of Harrowing at the top. Harrowing or Ruination deck. And so that very well might be like a War Mother's deck. So let's take a look at what that might look like. What in War Mothers do you need that's in this deck? Would be the question. War Mothers is only playing Unspeakable Horror from what I see. And Atrocity. Atrocity is a big one. So could be a deal breaker for the War Mothers, right? And if we want to just...
the same region combo, right?
It is the same... Oh, yeah, no. Yeah, you're right. It is the same region combo, too. Yeah, so that wouldn't work. So if we're going to do Shadow Isles, then we definitely want to do it with... I mean, you can't really do Fearsome if you do this Shadow Isle thing. Now, what you could do is swap it up. Instead of playing the Endure and the Freljord cards here, you could just turn this thing around into a Fearsome Noxious. Play Darius, right? Something like that. Like the deck that you were referencing, that you said you've been doing well with. So if we make this a Noxious deck, then we could do the Freljord on the backside. Another deck that I think might be worth bringing back is Zombie Ash. It's always been a good tournament deck. So you can do that with Deep, and then you'll be able to catch. Should be good against everything but like triple aggro lineups if you do it that way. You'll have like some mid-range decks that aren't going to do well against triple aggro lineups. Triple aggro lineups like probably going to be all Noxious, right? Triple Noxious. So that would be like your worst matchup. But I think you would have a lot of edges in all the mid-range lineups if people brought 2 or 3 value / mid-range decks, which I think would be more popular. Then I think you could take advantage of it by either playing triple aggro, or you could take advantage of it by playing these decks that kind of prey on mid-range decks, you know? Like the Swain decks are going to have trouble with an Endure style, or a Zombie Ash, or the Fearsomes are going to be good against Tom Kench, and, you know, Deep's going to go over the top of a lot of that, while also having good proactive game plans. Like if you play Zombie Ash, Deep, and then Fearsome, make this your Fearsome deck. If you wanted to share a code with that Fearsome deck too in the Academy chat, that would be great. We can take a look at it here on the call.
I'll attach the one I've been using on the ladder.
Yeah, we'll take a look at it. You said you made top 25 with it, huh?
Yeah.
Nice, man.
It's a fun deck. Why can't I fix this? Sorry, Discord's being weird.
That's okay. Yeah, so that's like another potential lineup if we wanted to do the Shadow Isle version. Is the point I'm pointing out here. You could also do the Freljord version. I mean, not the Freljord version, the Bilgewater version. Like we said, you could do Deep with Kench, Deep Kench, and then run it with an Allegiance deck. in the same region. And that's interesting because you have an allegiance deck from the region that you're mastering, which you would think would take up a lot of cards from these other decks, but it's very flexible, both the deep deck and the Kinch deck. Now, the one thing about the Kinch deck, though, is it doesn't have the same flexibility that a deep deck has, in that, yeah, you could branch out of Bilgewater, but branching out of Targon is tough. And when we built the format, it was kind of cool because everybody was playing Lee Zed at the time. And it was like, if you play Lee Zed, what region can you even play? Can you master? Because the reason that deck was so good, like aside from Lee just being great, it plays the best cards from both regions. Notify, Deny, Pale Cascade, the whole works, Guiding Touch. Just all the best cards, pretty much. So, jump into it like that. Let me get this code. We'll put your deck in. Copy. Alright, we'll do SI Region Master. Fearsome. Yeah, so right here there's Stalking Shadows. That would be a point of contention for the deep deck, but like I said earlier, with the deep deck, it could not play Stalking Shadows and be fine. It is a great card, but this deck would make better use of it. You have this Elise, Mishwraith, Wild Feast, fine. You don't need Wild Feast. Doom Beast, fine. Skitterer, fine. Where's a Mishwraith Caller? Atrocity, the Harrowing. So this deck is playing the Harrowing. Okay, so you got Harrowing in this deck, no big deal. So this is the Fearsome version. Okay, so not the Fearsome version. So this is, if we play this deck, we delete the Overwhelm. If we want to do Shadow Isle style, you got this and this. You got a Harrowing in here already. So that means it kind of rules off the possibility of playing Zombie Ash on the last one.
Is not super critical. Like, it's a good card. Good in the deck.
Yeah, no, I think if Shadow Isles is going to be your region master, you should have a deck with Harrowing in it. And this is one of them. But you can cheat in on the third deck, right? Like, is there Unspeakable Horror in here or Wild Feast or both? Let's see. Wild Feast.
It's the file right now. It could be one or the other.
Okay. Well, this is fine. Wild Feast is fine because what you'll do is you can do the day and night deck. And then you'd have like this value deck, value. And then you can have this Kill You mid-range deck, Fearsome, which also has a good amount of value in it as well. And then you could also play Deep. So let me get a day and night deck list, actually. And I'm going to put this this whole lineup in the chat for people, in the Academy chat, for people who are looking for example lineups. Let me get a code for this day and night deck because I haven't seen it much lately. I did play against it on a ladder the other day. Alright, get rid of the region locks here. Leona. Diana. Type of decks that are just good against like aggro usually. Oh, this is day and night that splashes. Look, check this out. This is day and night. Instead of splashing into the Shadow Isles, you just splash Omen Hawk, Fury of the North. Pretty interesting.
Oh, that's kind of neat.
The important part is it's Allegiance. Yeah, that was Swim right there playing that. But Shadow Isles is the most common. Rattling Bones has been playing this deck. See, Splash Unspeakable Horror. And that's it. Diana Leona right here. Just Splash Unspeakable Horror. The deck has a lot of value. Definitely. With the Mountain Scryers and Solari Priestess, you got Lunar, both Priestess actually. It's like get a body, pick up a Celestial. Good stuff. Spacey Sketcher. Dealing with situational things. A couple of cheap cards like, the Solari, the Dustbringer and the Soldier. That's where you can hit the Diana. Pretty good. Behold the Infinite. Star Shaping. And this is the win con on the deck, really. This is how I close the game, the Star Shaping. I like this deck. So we'll go ahead and copy that and then import it. And then we'll call it SI Region Master Day and Night. Okay. So then we have this lineup here. Boom, boom, boom. Now, a couple things that we need to change though. Make sure that we don't have any overlap. Is there a Vengeance in this deck? No. There's Atrocity. So that means if you have Atrocity in this deck, you can't play it in your deep deck. So if you want to deepen your Atrocity. But that's the thing. The deep deck's probably the most flexible. We'd have to fix the Stalking Shadows problem right here. Stalking Shadows is very, very much... It's not super necessary in deep, but it looks really good in this deck. Since you have Wraithcaller. So we could tailor the deep deck. Let me make a new file for it.
Fading Memories in the Deep Blues.
Yeah, there's a couple different ways you can do Faded Memories. Let me title it first. SI Region Master Deep. Okay. So, and they'll all have a single exclamation point so we can have them sorted. Yeah, so if you got the Stalking Shadows, there's a couple things you can do. You already have Lure the Depths. You can play... Yeah, you can play... a couple things. Do you have Hapless in that other deck? No. Right?
Oh, no.
Yeah, so you can play Glimpse if you want. Like 2 of Glimpse. Right? And you can play 2 Glimpse and 1 Hapless, right? Gives you another early blocker. They can block 2 bodies, right? Gives you another 1-drop you can play behind a Maokai on 5. Which I do like. And it gives you a sustainable body that makes you can Glimpse. Glimpse is also good at killing the Thorny Toad. Getting you a little deeper. You can play Glimpse. Or you can just play, if you want to skip out on the Glimpse, you can play Faded Memories. Like we talked about earlier. Maybe you do a mix, like 2 Faded Memories, 1 Glimpse, something like that. You could also make it full-on Miscall, which would be pretty demanding if you played full-on Miscall, because you're going to have a lot of 3 drops is the problem. When you have that many 3s, you're going to get jammed up somewhere. It's like 3 spell mana, 3 spell mana. So it could be a little tougher. But I think it's just a matter of preference. I think you can play 1 Miscall, double Faded Memories. I think that'll work. Something like that. And then that way you have 3 cards that can promote your tossing, because all 3 of them do. If you have a tosser, they're just going to be great. Miscall or Faded Memories. Which is kind of the same idea you were getting from your Stalking Shadows. Because Stalking Shadows, you almost always wanted to hit a Dredge Treasures or a 3-drop. Deadbloom Wonder. Yeah. So yeah, this seems like fine, actually. But those are the couple changes you would make to your deep deck. So let me go ahead and share this in the chat. That way we'll have the 3 deck list. Region Master lineup. Deep. Fearsome. There we go. Okay, and that's if we wanted to build a lineup around the deck that's your number 1 deck. You see what I'm saying? That would be like an easy way to do it. But it's because we took 2 angles of approach here, because we got a deck that doesn't really use big air quotes cards from either region, right? So it slots into either one pretty easily. And also playing a single Allegiance deck, if this is the type of deck that you would want to play. Day and night. Alright, Cool. Got him. Yeah, and that would be the SI way to do it. If you went Bilge Water, you could do similar. Region Master. We did mention, yeah, so if you did the deep deck with the Kench deck, kill the Kench. Tom Raka, and then the last deck was like a Gangplank. So we'll pull that one back up. You do Gangplank with Freyord. Turbo Sejuani. There's a couple decks you can do out of this too. If you play the Kench though, you can't play the Kench. If you wanted to play like Ash Ketchum. I haven't played that deck much, but recently I played it a lot. Yeah, let's just do Gangplank or Sejuani. See what it pulls up here. Yeah. Turbo Sedge GP. Yeah. Babylon Bureau to find it. Find them all. Something like this. This will work. Okay. And yeah, that's probably one of the easier lineups. If so, we got two of them. We got Bilgewater SI. That's one way to build. Is there another way? I mean, deep is the key to those two regions. If we move over to another region, Discard Aggro is a pretty unique deck that doesn't really play all the cards that all the regions play because a lot of the discard cards work. I actually was playing some Casino the other day, which was interesting. It will play Mystic Shot, TF, get excited. But all these cards aren't in all the decks. Slotbot, it's just kind of TF, Fortune Croaker, and the deck can be played without the Fortune Croaker. I don't know. I think I might have won. I only played like 3 games, so I went like 2-1 or whatever. But just like another one of those decks that probably can edge a little easy. Either way. Although Piltover, I imagine you want Mystic Shot and something. Piltover is like the weakest region though, so I don't know why you would want to master that region. Honestly. Yeah, we could do another one. Let's see what coming up on an hour right now. You go. I'll take any questions right now if anybody's got any questions. And if you're watching the VOD and you're not catching them live, feel free to DM me. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
I have a question about just kind of like lineup philosophy. So, like, for me, when I think of like tournament lineups, I'm thinking of like, you know, not region masters. I've never played in a region masters format, but
Well,
like, I'm looking for like an all mid-range format, or like an all mid-range lineup, or an all control lineup, or an all aggro lineup. Those seem to be very like popular because they kind of like simplify your band stage.
True.
And so I think the region format is interesting because, you know, just looking at this list we have, it's like we have Deep, which is a mid-rangey control list. You have the Harrowing deck, which is more aggro than mid-range. And then you have the Invoke deck, which is
a mid-range value deck.
Mid-range. And I'm just wondering if that like will complicate like what you want to ban in certain scenarios.
Sure.
Because the decks are kind of doing different things.
Right. Yeah.
So
If
those two different things.
they are doing different things, that's true. And it's the type of thing though where you can over like that philosophy is totally relevant. Where you want 3 decks. We talked about this when we were talking about building lineups
Mhm.
before, and I know Yang went into it in a previous call as well, where you want 3 decks that can do the same thing to simplify the ban phase, right? That's like the biggest advantage of doing so. It's like, okay, I brought 3 aggro decks. I'm gonna take their just ban their best anti-aggro deck, and it makes the ban phase super easy. Whenever you split it off like that, you really got to have a little bit more intimate knowledge into the range of each of these decks to really understand, how, to be able to effectively ban, basically.
Mhm.
So would want to played a lot of games with all these decks and like not have like a throw in here. Like this is a deck that I haven't played much with, but if I was to just speculate, and again I am no expert on this deck, right? I would say that this deck would be decent against aggro because you have Solari Soldier and Shield Breaker, right?
Mhm.
In a similar way that the TF Go Hard deck is good against aggro, right? Because you just have like Diana, you have these cards shutting down early combat, and then you also have some. I mean, a lot of good cards coming out of the Invoke mechanic against aggressive decks like Golden Sisters. So if you're jamming the early game, you got Unspeakable Horror as well. So you jam the early game. I mean, Leona. I mean, the whole kit of the Daybreak kit is just good against aggro normally. So we can safely assume that this is going to be pretty good against aggro. What can we say about this deck? Now you play this deck a lot. How do you feel about this deck against aggro?
It's good against certain aggro. Like it's good against discard aggro. It can be good against. It's not very good against scouts.
Scouts, yeah. That's what I was thinking.
The scouts, pretty hard.
I can totally see that. So scouts will be an issue for this deck and for this deck, this deep deck. Less so this deep deck than the other deck, I would say. But a Relentless Pursuit can totally wreck you. So knowing that, I mean, that's why the Beast Below's here instead of playing Vol Feast, because Vol Feast Withering Whale does nothing against the Scouts decks for the most part. It gives them a reason to play the Ranger's Resolve. If you ever have to count on it, you better not count on it, basically. But whenever you curtail off that and you play Beast Below, this is like a good card against both Fearsomes and Scouts because it'll get a 2-for-1 out of a Scout deck, right? And then it'll also get, at least a 2-for-1 against a Fearsome deck probably too, depending on how big the miss rates are, right? And then also, if you're talking about a proactive game plan, the Nautilus into the double Beast Below is just nasty. So that's one good thing, like against like War Mothers and bigger decks. So where it will have trouble is, like you said, against Scouts or against Burn. Aggro in general is going to be difficult for this deck. It does have better game against Scouts, though, which is good. And this will have a bad Scouts matchup. But I think that this deck is probably going to help out against Scouts because you got early plays, which are great, and then you have removal coming out of your Priestesses for a Misfortune. There's like some big plays that can be made. You get this 5/5. You got a little bit of healing with the Star Shaping, so this will bring balance to your whole lineup. This deck brings a lot of balance to your lineup here. So they're gonna ban your Balancer. You see that could be an issue if they start targeting this with the ban, because then you're going to be kind of opened up to a Scouts lineup. Could have trouble. But then the deep deck is geared a little bit more for Scouts than it is against Burn because there's no Whale, no Vile Feast. So that's kind of big. Because the proactive deep game plan actually can keep up with Scouts if you're playing thick units early. So I think that you might still have the ban Scouts in case this gets banned over here. But the good thing that this has going for it is you can beat all the over-the-top decks. And you can beat all the mid-range decks with a lineup like this. So aggro is most definitely going to be your weakest point here. Even though these decks, as you said, do different things. The thing about it is both these decks are proactive as hell. And this deck is just like a 50-50er. Because it's just going to ride the middle. It's going to clamp down on some aggro decks, but it's going to ride the middle. And then how good it does against the other mid-range and control decks are going to come off of, did the invoke show up for you? You know? Like you play against Trundle, and then you're not seeing your common or whatever with this, you're going to have trouble. You know? I mean, that's just the way it is. This is the way it's going to be. That's the nature of this deck, honestly. Right? The late game, you can actually do well in the late game because of star shaping, being able to heal, and then, you know, your elusive Celestials are good against that deck. So, and like, you know, Avalanche will do a little bit to you, but, you know, you'll get through the early and mid game, get some chip shot damage, and then, you know, start shaping them up. I think that matchup's not that bad. You have a lot of value in this deck that you'll be able to keep up at least card advantage with a control deck. Even something like Ezreal Karma. Right? I'm not Ezreal Karma, like a Karma, Spooky Karma deck. Right? And that's another thing, is that's another new deck in the format, and both these decks are going to do well against Spooky Karma as well. The value from here, and then also the Maokai ult, I guess you could say, is giving us the edge in that match as well, and against War Mothers. So I think both these decks can do well against War Mothers. I think the Fearsome deck's probably not that bad against War Mothers either. So you have like a lot of let-throughs. When we talked about deck building in the first call that I did, you have like a lot of decks you can just let through. So what you do have from a tougher ban, you do get a lot of let-throughs. Any Spooky Karma, any kind of control deck you could think of. You have a Harrowing deck sitting in the middle. You got Value Town on the right, and you got Deep, which is just, you know, enemy number one for these control decks of whatever flavor, pretty much. The Deep decks can run them down. So control, slower mid-range, and mid-range should all have trouble with this lineup. You see what I'm saying? So it only leaves out aggro. And whenever it comes to aggro, you could just ban your worst aggressive match. So it would likely be Scouts. Because this is not going to have trouble against burn decks. You know? Because you're matching the early units easy. You have Unspeakable Horror to gain a little life. And then you could always get Sisters off of Priestess or Mountain Scryer. On top of a whole Leona just running it down. The Leona curve is just great against any aggro deck. So I think it's a good lineup. And you kind of have this pendulum here because when you play like a day and night deck here and you play Deep over here, the way that this Deep is configured, so just to point it out, there's no Vile Feast, no Wither Whale, no Grasp, right? It's a very proactive Deep deck. It's like I'm doing my thing and I hope it's good enough, but I'm doing my thing every time and I'm hitting Deep turn 6 to 7 every time. That's the plan. And so if you build it like that, you don't really have, you have this nice balance here where you have like the police against the aggro deck, and you just have this scales up a little bit more with no dead cards. So if they do like against aggro, they're going to be banning this deck, I would imagine, out of all three of these decks. And if that's the case, you just ban their best aggro deck. You know, the one that lines up the best against the Deep deck. Because they're going to let this deck through if they're triple aggro. They're going to let it through. And so you just find out which one would be the most devastating for it, ban it, and then you have two proactive decks, and it's probably going to be the Scouts deck if they're playing Scouts in the aggro lineup. So yeah, triple aggro most definitely is going to be your worst matchup. But I think since both of your other decks that are not the anti-aggro decks are proactive as well, I don't think you got a racing shot, is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
And that's all I needed. And the thing about it is, tournament Swiss, you know, you'll go make it to the top, basically. And I don't think triple aggro is the easiest to build either in Region Master. Like, you do get, so you could get Pirate aggro, which has gotten a little worse. You could do Pirate aggro with the discard aggro, right? Mm-hmm. And then you could maybe jump into a Fearsome. But when we start talking about Fearsome aggro decks, those decks are like the easier decks for these decks to beat whenever it comes to aggro. And then what was the other possibility? If you have to go Noxious, it's got to be Shadow Isles, right? You already did Piltover. Maybe you could do like a what other Noxious deck can you play? You can play Ash Sejuani, but that's a mid-range deck that you shouldn't have too much trouble with.
I think it's just some kind of burn deck, some kind of Fearsome deck, like discard.
Whatever their aggro, and that's air quotes, is for their third deck, it's going to look a lot more like a mid-range deck than the other two aggro decks that we just mentioned. Pirate aggro and you know what I mean? Like, you said that this deck's aggro, right? But if you look at it, it looks pretty mid-range. You know, it does take the aggro role a lot, but it looks a little mid-rangey. You know,
Yeah, there's a lot of
a lot of its draws are like that. It's very mid-rangey. Whenever when we talk about speed, is it always the aggressor? Yeah, but whenever it comes to speed, the deck is on a mid-range speed tier, which is going to like level it out with deep. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then it obviously going to level it out with the same deck. Not saying everybody's going to play this as their third deck, but they might opt into a mid-range Noxious deck. Think Swain, anything. Swain, anything. Fearsomes, Ash Sejuani. So if they're going to play an aggro deck, they're going to end up with the third deck that's going to look like a mid-range deck. Does that make sense? Triple aggro is just going to be too hard to build.
That makes sense.
So I think that's a reasonable concern, but I think that would probably be the worst concern to have with a lineup like this, basically. And I'd feel definitely okay in there. And again, you could do the deep with the Kench, right? And then we could play the last deck, which was the Gangplank. But that's Riptide Rex. The question of how good is Riptide Rex going to be after the nerf,
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, I suspect it'll still be as good in that deck, because that deck's already putting on the pressure. But,
it was all only like a 1 or 2 low in that list, usually.
yeah, I mean...
I was thinking TX Swain, it's a 3 of GP.
No, GP Sedge is 3 of, and Bjerg, you find it sometimes. But I think it still does enough, that it's still good. I mean, that thing rarely ever connected for 7 anyway, to start with. And, like, losing a cannon, I mean, sure, that's bad, but... I mean, it's bad. It's a nerf. There's no, like, happy slant to that nerf. But I don't think it makes the card unplayable at all. I think it still does what it did. Just not as much. And you always didn't need the big... I mean, if you were on that level, you were probably already fine. Miracle Rexes, sometimes you needed them, but those games you were already behind. So
you have a flip Sejuani and you're playing Riptide Rex.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Really or same thing with the Gangplank. It's like, I'm Rexing after I attacked you with the Gangplank leveled up. Who cares? So, yeah, I think that's another way to go with those lineups. Now, if we move over to another region, though, I haven't given it too much thought. For Demacia, that one seems like the hardest one to master, I would think. Mostly call into the single combat. Freyord is one that I've already mastered, and I played like Braum Goatherder, which I haven't played his deck in a while, so I don't really recommend it. But there's like basically Ember Maiden with Star Spring, right? Is the idea. With a little bit of Braum, some Soraka. Also, Braum is nice for, regeneration is good with the Star Spring, taking it up. If you can grow your Braum on the back end, Astral Projection and the like. Not the best deck, but there's a lot of Freyord decks you can play. You can do like a Zombie Ash, which uses the freeze part of Freyord. You can do the Yeti part and do like Yeti Pursuit, which jumps into Demacia, right? And then you could also do the whatever Targon Freyord version you like, whether it's going to be the Trundle up top stuff. Frostbites might be conflicting with the Ash deck. You'd even Ash Sejuani if you don't want a Zombie Ash. And then if you go at it that way, then the other Freyord, it's going to come down to like you could splash into it with Endure if you want. A lot of things you can do with the Freyord. If you want a different kind of Ash deck, I like the Ash Fishing. But Freyord in general is going to be like a triple mid-range deck. Like, the only over-the-top stuff you're going to see is, and you should see, is if you look at the card pool for Freyord. You just start off, well, we're going to want to see Trundle, for sure. Trundle, Tryndamere probably be in a lineup. You do Ash with or without Sejuani. because Ash has got its own kit. She's got her own kit going. So, and it's different from the Trundle Tryndamere kit. So if you wanted to do that, like an Ash kit and a Tryndamere kit, that's pretty easy. Then the third is going to have to be something that you splash into, whether it be like a Nivea Control with Shadow Isles, but then that kind of takes off the table at Trundle Tryndamere. So it's kind of one or the other there. And I think Trundle is getting nerfed though, so maybe you want to look at a Nivea. But some kind of Shadow Isles, and then you get Ash Sejuani and have like this mid-range control style deck. And then the last deck could be maybe Endure, something to that effect. But you should probably play Field Rush or War Mothers if you're doing Freljord for sure. If you want to do like Trundle A-Soul, you can do that with Revitalizing Roar, and then yeah, if you want to master the region, I don't think it's too bad. The point of contention probably is going to be the flash freezes. And I think if you do Freljord, you're probably going to have an Allegiance deck splash into it. Maybe something like Mishwraith splashing in for the Endure, or like just a heavy Shadow Isles Endure style deck splashing for Endure. You're going to have a splash in, I'm pretty sure. Even when we talked about earlier about Allegiance cards too, we've seen like Garen Ash as a deck, like a Bannerman deck. So it's not that hard to splash into whatever region, but that's probably how you would take the Freljord to start with. Is it would go with that first line, probably like an Allegiance deck or two into it. As we saw also the Day and Night deck, instead of playing Unspeakable Horror, just splashed in for for Omenhawk pretty much, which is pretty interesting. You see Kinku Elusive splash in for Omenhawk. Either way, you're going to have an Allegiance deck, because just looking at Freljord in general, it's like this is the lineup. It's like you have two different kits here, and that's pretty much it. You have the Freeze kit, and you have the obvious pairing with Shadow Isles or whatever, the Trundle Tryndamere. But maybe Trundle A-Soul as a possibility. The big Freljord deck. And then you have the Freeze Freljord deck. That's kind of like how it goes. And Anivia is kind of, you know, more on the side of the big. Obviously, it's got Enlightened as a keyword ability. So that's how I would look to build a Freljord region deck list. What other regions? Ionia is a possibility. It's a little difficult. You could do like a Yasuo, but the problem is a lot of key Ionia cards want to go in all the decks. Think Deny, Nopify. Those are cards that you're going to want to see. Even Allegiance decks that splash into Ionia, they splash for those cards. That's one identifier of like, is this going to be an easy one to master? It's like, all right, if that's what you splash in for, is that card in all the decks? It pretty much is. Deny is like the reason to play Ionia in the current meta for the most part. So I think it would be probably too hard to let me turn over this Freljord to build Ionia. You could do, I think it's going to be relegated in this meta as like maybe Allegiance splashing into it or Allegiance splashing into it, right, for Deny, which is going to be hard to do because if you're an Allegiance deck splashing into it, what is your mastery? It's not Ionia, because we're talking about how you can't do it. If it's Bannerman, well, look, what else are you doing for Demacia? You know, if you're splashing in maybe from like Hecarim deck and splashing in on it, or Spooky Karma. Well, Spooky Karma, see, that deck's just a whole different deal. That would be a different one. You could play Spooky Karma, but that'd probably be a Shadow Isles mastery. So I don't think you can master Ionia, honestly. With the new buffs, though, it's possible that a support archetype can just be like mono units support and skip the Deny, maybe play some different interaction, because Fuzzy Caretaker is getting a buff up to 3 mana. But yeah, that's what I think about the Ionia deck. You could do like a Shadow, you could maybe do like a Yasuo, but the thing is, see, the Yasuo deck's going to want the Deny. It's going to want that Nopify. And I don't think Yasuo's that good. I played it in Fight Night recently. So I think it's going to be a tough one to do. Targon's tough for the same reasons. And I think the easier ones, and Demacia is tough too. Because if you check out Demacia, it's like, man, how am I going to master Demacia? Who wants to splash, wants to splash into Demacia for anything right now? You know, Shyvana's going to be nice with the buff for sure. But all in all, You have like the range of Demacia is kind of mid range and more mid range. You know, there's some aggro like in the form of scouts for sure, but that deck's like more mid rangey than the other aggro decks sometimes. So honestly, it's like where do you go? You could do like a Fiora into a. You could do just a mono Fiora deck that splashes into. All right, maybe this isn't that hard. You could Fiora splash into all the freezes. But the thing is, single combat's got to be here. If you play Shyvana, we're just single combat. You play Lux, who doesn't want a Lux plus single combat with the barrier? You know, that's the problem. Single combat's the most efficient card, and being able to branch away from that is going to be hard. It's just the best. So you're going to play it in any one of those decks. So I don't think you can master it. Honestly, don't. I'd be surprised to see any lineups that try to. Have to think way hard on it, basically. And like for this is the first time it's going to be. I don't know if everybody's going to be that deep on it. You know.
I think like maybe you could do like a Lucian Callista like miss rate deck, and then like scouts, and then like either like dragons or like Shen Fiora. That's like the best you can do.
Right. You can. That's okay. That would be the biggest split. Is if you did like a Lucian Shadow Isle deck, like you said, and scouts, because it splits the difference. Both those decks, but the Lucian deck's probably gonna want the single combat too. So the last deck would have to be Lux, no single combat. You could probably do that because Shyvana's gonna want single combat because she levels up off that dragon damage. So it's very specific. You're right. It would have to be like a Lucian Shadow Isles, maybe a Volts deck or something crazy. A big Callista deck. I mean, Tiana Crown Guard did get a buff, so maybe people will start trying to use her again. You do that top end Crown Guard deal. You could potentially play that deck without single combat. And then have Shyvana over here. Or, yeah. Scouts on one end, no single combat. Lucian in the middle. And then a bigger up deck like a Lux or a Shyvana. Getting the single combat in one of those decks, yeah. That would be about it on Demacia. Because who's splashing into Demacia for anything but single combat? Like, you don't really see it. Even the Yeti Pursuit deck, it's like single combat, Relentless Pursuit. It's just there to steal a Relentless Pursuit, pretty much. So yeah, moving beyond that, we did Freyyor, we did Bajwater, we talked about Ionia, did Targon. Noxious, we talked about that, it's probably going to be triple aggro. But the third deck is probably going to be more mid-range. That was a big note of if you go into Noxious. It lends itself to where, yeah, you got discard aggro, yeah, you can do pirate aggro. But the third deck's going to be the least aggressive of the three. Which is going to be the point that people are going to attack on your... Don't expect it to get banned, basically. Because a lot of people are going to ban your most aggressive deck. Because the middling deck. So bear that in mind. So maybe your third mid-range deck could be like a Demacia Bannerman deck that splashes into Noxious. And so yeah, it is more mid-rangey, but it stays aggro. Something, think maybe like a Lucian Draven or something. Right? That wouldn't be that crazy. Actually, that'd probably be the best way to go about your third Noxious deck. Without having to, like, get into a mid-range deck. I've seen a lot of people take it with just play Ash Sedge or something, or a Swain deck in that third deck. But if you want to stay true to aggro, that might be the best route to go. It's either that or Fearsome. So if you think that Demacia is going to be better, that's a huge possibility. You do leave off the whole top end of Noxious, though, to keep it triple aggro. But that's kind of the plan anyway. Losing out on Leviathan. There's also some crazy, like, Elise Swain decks from the past that might need a callback. Can be looked into further. So that's the range on Noxious. I think Piltover is kind of the worst. One of the worst. You could do like a Teemo Elusives, right? You could do like Ezreal. You could do Heimer Vi. That would kind of be in the same kit. Heimer Vi. The problem is that all the decks, minus the Jinx decks, are going to pretty much want Mystic Shot. Even like an elusive deck that splashes Teemo probably want Mystic Shot. So things do change though, because Ezreal's getting a rework by the time the tournament's going to be around. So we're going to need to see what Ezreal does. So you could have like a big Ezreal Shadow Isles deck I did do well with a Karina control deck, Ezreal Heimer. After Ezreal nerfed to 10, I still did well with Ezreal Heimer when Heimer got unnerfed, basically. And then you could do like a Jinx deck. The thing is, if you play the Jinx deck and you're playing Ezreal Heimer, you're not going to be able to play Mystic Shot in your Jinx deck, which isn't a big deal for discard aggro, but that would be like the only. You could do like discard aggro, and then you could have some kind of Teemo deck that doesn't want Mystic Shot. So I would think maybe Elusives. Or you could do like a Bannerman with Vi, just as like a throw-in, right?
A little bit of a meme, but I actually think the PNZ Porto deck is like not horrible.
Oh, I haven't seen it. I haven't seen like the Pro deck.
Vi, I think, are the champions it runs.
Okay. Yeah, I played Pros before when Braum was 1 power. And I don't think it looked like a meme, but it would play like a deck. So yeah, that's another way you could go with it. You could do like Vi. That deck doesn't really need Mystic Shot. So you could do like an Ezreal Heimer deck. You could just splash into the Vi. We've seen it in Bannerman before, splashing into the Vi, because it has ways to do temporary buffs or permanent with Bannerman, which is nice. You could also do just Heimer Vi and a Targan. You could run discard aggro with Jinx, and then you do some kind of Ezreal deck once it gets reworked. Maybe like a Freeze Ezreal. That deck might be back now, because freezes are pretty good.
Bust out the Elusives. That was PNZ, right?
Yeah, you do Elusives too, yeah.
PNZ
but
is a weird
I think
region.
Yeah, it's a weird region, and I think the biggest point to take from all of it is that if you do try and do PNZ, I don't think there's any road that doesn't lead you down a Jinx deck with no Mystic Shot. If that makes sense. Unless you're just splashing into PNZ for something. Like that, I guess that is a possibility. You can splash into it just for, like, you could be a Target Allegiance deck that plays Vi. Just plays Vi and Rummage or something, I've seen that before. There's some things you can do. But I think for the most part, you're going to want Mystic Shot in either the Heimer or the Ezreal deck. And that being the case, you're going to have to come up with a deck that plays one of these two champs and doesn't need Mystic Shot. Or two decks that can play either of these champs. No Mystic Shot. Because, I mean, what can you splash into? Why would you splash PNZ? There's not really any great reasons, honestly. Like, I'm looking. You tell me when to stop. It's not here. Give it all? Like, maybe?
The only deck I've seen ever splash PNZ effectively is the Draven Swain deck. But that uses all the removal of PNZ.
Yeah, it uses it all, yeah. Yeah, the Draven Swain deck. Yeah, you gotta play Mystic Shot on that deck. So that's going to be the tough nut to crack on Piltover, and it's already the worst region. So probably not worth doing. So yeah, this is what you should expect. Shadow Isles, Freyord, right, and Noxious. These are going to be the 3 regions that people are going to master. The easiest to master. I think Bilgewater is nice because with access to deep, it makes the deck building process pretty easy. Because the deck, like, that's my number one. And the cool part about this is that it trumps a lot of mid-range control decks, that deep deck, which is good starting building block for building a deck, so a lineup. Because if you start with that, then you can like secure the other things by, I mean, if you play Tahm Kench, Soraka, let's take a look here. What were we saying? We're playing Kench and then playing the Gangplank deck. Gangplank deck also, like, that Sejuani setup is, tough for some decks as well. Being able to freeze. Yeah, but yeah, I know that's pretty much it. So I don't know. That's my first. This is what I've been thinking, developing the format, and then the way the meta is right now. I think that's the biggest thing to expect. These 3 regions possibly Bilgewater. These 4 regions are going to be the ones that you're going to need to beat. So just expect these to be the decks that you're going to play against. Freyord, Shadow Isles, Noxious, Bilgewater. And that the rest of the regions will be supporting cast in some capacity. It's not going to change much whenever it comes to just overall. People will play the better regions. But these are going to be the best ones. Because they're going to be the easiest to build from. So even if the target is better, whatever the rankings are, it's going to get split up a little bit. I think naturally that's the way it's going to develop. But I think that's going to be it for the call tonight. If there's any more questions, make sure to use the chat. If you're catching this on the VOD, if you got any questions in the Academy, just post it in the Academy chat. So you don't have to DM me. Just post it in the Academy chat. Tag me in the NOLA Gold, IQ NOLA Gold. That way I can see it and everybody else in the Academy can see your question because it might be a question that other people didn't think about asking. Anything else, PK? Questions? Comments? Complaints? Feedback?
No, I thought it was great. Super informative.
Nice. Now, Good.
Sometimes I get too locked in on just having a lineup that is all trying to do the same thing. I get stuck in that way. So it was good to look at it from a different perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Also, the small hedges that can be made in each deck can vastly change how a deck plays, in a lineup. Like that deep deck is just not there to beat aggro ever. So, it's way up on the up and up there. So balancing your lineup is kind of big. And so hedges can be made in other lineups as well. The third deck in that same lineup that we talked about. This is just a great example. So there could be some hedges in this lineup. Now this is obviously an aggressive deck. You got Apprehend in here. But it's you wouldn't want to cut the Valfies from this deck. Or Doom Beast. It's just not acceptable if this is the way you're going to take your deep deck. Pretty much. So... And that can help round out, anomalies like the configuration on this deep deck. When it comes to your lineup, yeah, pretty good. All right, I'm going to end this recording. One love, everybody. If you catch it on the VOD, remember to chime in on the IQ Academy on Discord. And stay tuned. Thursday, we're going to go over this more with new developments. We're gonna go more in depth, and we're gonna have some graphics as well. So if you